Hello guys, so in this video I want to introduce to you the central nervous system. Now, what is the central nervous system? The central nervous system is actually made up of two main parts. We have the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord. So we're going to be taking a look at the central nervous system. Now, the brain is protected by the skull, right? But just behind the skull, there are other protective layers, right? And I'm going to be talking about them in a short while. All right, so the first protective layer immediately after the brain is what we call the pear layer, the pear layer. Now, this is a very soft layer. It protects the brain. It protects the brain. Okay. Now, the second one that follows is called it has this structure, a web-like structure. Now, this is called the arachnoid layer. And we also have the last layer, which is characterized by toughness. So this last layer is very tough and it's called the dura mater. So you have the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pear mater. So these three constitute what we call the meninges. Meninges. They make up the meninges. Now, when you have an inflammation of these layers, then you are said to have meningitis. All right. So that is that. Now, looking at the main structure of the brain actually is divided, the brain and the spinal cord, which is the central nervous system, is divided into three main parts. We have the cerebrum, the cerebrum. Then we have the smaller portion of the cerebrum, which is called the cerebellum. The cerebellum. And then we have the brain stem. The brain stem. Right? So these different parts play different function. And I'm going to be talking about that in a little while. Now, looking at the cerebrum is actually divided into four main parts, four lobes. All right. So you have the first division here. This is called the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe. Then you have another division here, and this is called the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe. Then you have another division here. This division is called the occipital lobe. Occipital lobe. That's the occiput. Right. Then you have this last division called the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe. So these are the major divisions of the cerebrum. The CNS is actually made up of both the gray and white matter. All right. Now, if you divide the brain, you would find gray substances and also white substances. Now, what makes up the gray substances and what makes up the white matter? I'm going to be explaining that now. Now, we know that the basic unit of the central nervous system is the neuron, right? Now, the structure of the neuron looks like this. We have the cell body and the axon, right? Now, this is just a rough sketch. Okay, so this part, this portion, is what makes up the gray matter, while this portion, the axon, is what makes up the white matter. Okay, so the gray matter, the white matter. So a lot of these neurons, the cell body of the neuron comes together to make up the gray matter, while the axon makes up the white matter. So looking at the part of the cerebellum now, the frontal lobe, what's the function of the frontal lobe? It is actually a seat of consciousness, right? It is made up of motor cortex, which is responsible for conscious activities like singing, dancing, sitting, standing up. It's all controlled by this part of the brain. Okay. Now, moving to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe contains what we call the somatocortex, somatosensory cortex, rather. That means that this part con- controls the sensory actions of the body, like pain, response to both external and internal stimuli, touch, and others. Okay, it is controlled by the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe has to do with visuals. All right, so for you to see an image and recognize it, it is the function of the occipital lobe. Okay, now the temporal lobe functions in audit, right? So it helps in auditory stuffs. Okay, so both you speaking, hearing, has to do with the temporal lobe. Okay, so that's the function of the cerebellum. Now coming, that's the function of the cerebrum rather. Now looking at the cerebellum functions in or has three major functions, right? Tone, balance, and posture. They are all controlled by these parts of the brain, the cerebellum. So I'll use a very simple example. Assume you want to pick up something. Probably it is a box that you think that it has a lot of things inside and it is heavy, and you bend to pick it up, right? When you pick it up and you find out that the box is actually empty, now what helps you to gain balance and gain posture and not falling back is the cerebellum. Okay, so this part of the brain is responsible for balance, your posture, and your tone. All right. Now, coming to the brain stem. The brain stem is actually made up of three parts. Three parts. The first is the midbrain, which is this midbrain. The second is the pons, and the third is the medulla oblongata. So these are the three major parts of the brain stem. Okay, so thank you and see you in my next video where I'm going to be discussing some intricate parts of the central nervous system.